Hey all, another Crusade is an isometric RPG set in a world full of mages, knights and dragons, and just like other games in the genre, turn-based battles are a central part of the game's structure, but here in a slightly different form, as timing and reaction skills play a decisive role in how successful you will be. The game that was released earlier this week is published by Limited Run Games and is priced at $20 in Nintendo's eShop. In this video I discuss basic aspects of the game and whether it is worth buying. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, I review new games every week. Let's start with the game's story, which broadly contains aspects that point towards the epic. We're talking about a world affected by meteorite impacts and massive barriers that popped up all over the continent. It's somewhat of a mystery why the world has changed, but this is where our protagonists come into the picture. The main character of the game is a knight named Ray Rayzend, or Ray Rayzend. A relatively silent hero who usually lets others handle the communication. As the game opens up, he encounters fellow players who have their own motivations for why they see benefits in teaming up. But the goal is clear, to explore the world and find out what lies behind all the meteorites and barriers. But even though the narrative is relatively clear, the game's tone is all the more unclear. I can honestly say that I don't know what to feel when I read through all the dialogues. This is because it pulls in different directions. Sometimes the dialogues are light-hearted or downright frivolous. For example, what is typical of an RPG is joked about in an RPG. On the other hand, this is mixed up with significantly heavier dialogues about the fate of the world. So the bottom line is that the tone of the game is somewhat unclear. I don't mean that an RPG needs to be super serious, but in this game they have pushed in a few different narrative concepts that don't always go in line with each other. It gets a bit messy. And so I have to highlight something that I feel is problematic. Now I have played the game on Nintendo Switch and apparently there are frame rate issues. I guess the goal is to reach 60 frames per second, but apparently that is unattainable. In large parts of the game it looks like this. The frame rate is usually somewhere between 40 and 55, and in this case I must point out that it affects the experience. Running around the different environments feels choppy due to the low frame rate, and this is a consistent problem. And here are some tests from the first areas of the game, and as you can see for yourself, the frame rate rarely if ever reaches 60 FPS, unfortunately. Maybe it looks different on PC or other consoles, but this is the current state of the game on Nintendo Switch. But worth adding is that this is the situation when you run around. I don't find it to be a problem when you're fighting, as the fights are static as they're turn-based. But I still want to see it as a performance issue and hope the developers can fix the problem so we get a stable experience. When it comes to the design of the game, it consists of a number of components. Firstly, there is a relatively large world map consisting of a number of landscapes or areas. The areas are of varying character. We are talking about forests, deserts, swamps, cities and mines, and each place has its own unique style. So when you reach a new place it feels new and fresh. You run around in maze-like systems that are seen from an isometric perspective, and as far as I know there are no maps, so you may have to memorize every place you explore. Out in the world you usually run into various creatures, and this is how you engage in combat. As I said, the combat system is turn-based, but revolves a lot around how well you manage to time your attacks and how well you defend yourself. Every time you make a physical attack, a time window opens that determines how strong your attack will be. It's about making a great or perfect attack, and I find it a real challenge to continuously execute perfect attacks, because it requires, well, perfect timing. You have to be very concentrated and follow the animations carefully to be able to feel when the attack is going to be carried out. If you are 100th of a second too early or too late, the attack is downgraded and you do less damage. Although this is a twist on typical turn-based battles, I still want to point out that sometimes it feels a little frustrating when you miss making perfect attacks, and even though it's an unconventional way to fight, it still feels a bit awkward. However, I appreciate the special abilities. For example, you can use magic attacks that damage multiple enemies at once, and here other principles apply. For example, you sometimes have to rotate the left stick quickly or press several times to do as much damage as possible, but these spells consume spell power, so cannot be used continuously. After winning a battle, you get experience points, and in true RPG spirit, there is a level up system. But it's basically impossible to level past your opponents. This is because when you reach a certain level in a certain area, you suddenly need huge amounts of XP to reach the next level, something that can only be done when you get to the next area. Simply put, each area has its own experience pool, which means that you always fight on equal terms against the enemy. In the game you come across a few different puzzles. I have to say that they are generally quite entertaining, but there are too few of them. I wish there were more. I would almost go so far as to say that the puzzles are the game's saving grace. For example, it could be about collecting different clues in order to crack codes or to find unique objects that open up new paths. In the cities you can also buy items to be delivered to specific individuals. Figuring out who should have the item can be a bit tricky, but I also think this adds to the entertainment value. It adds an investigative aspect to the game, and I like it. So overall, you can say that the design is to explore an area, kill a boss, reach a town or village, communicate with the inhabitants and solve some problems. This is not an open world game, rather it's about progressing from area to area, so the game is relatively linear. When it comes to equipment and stats, it's relatively simple. Your character can use one weapon, one armor, and one accessory. Some items can be found in chests out in the areas, but some can be bought from merchants. Visually, only the different weapons change, so even if you wear a new armor, your men will always look the same. When it comes to stats, there are no surprises. We're talking about HP, attack, defense, magic attack, magic defense, and so on. What's interesting is that you can boost your stats by finding unique crystals. They're often hidden, so you have to explore every corner to get to them, but it's worth it. The crystals can boost one's character significantly, so it's a good idea to explore. Another Crusade is an RPG that offers a good challenge. Above all, I consider the boss fights to be relatively unforgiving, where you have to be extra concentrated and sometimes use potions to cope more easily. But the degree of difficulty is still relatively high due to the fact that it's basically impossible to outlevel your opponents. And many fights can also require learning how the enemies behave, what attacks they use and how to defend yourself. I think this game might suit those who want to play a slightly more unconventional RPG, where timing is an important factor in how successful you will be. But I also want to point out that the narrative is a bit messy, as the tone is sometimes very serious and sometimes confusingly ridiculous. Also, the game suffers from frame rate issues, which I hope will be fixed as soon as possible. I also ran into a bug when I was fighting. For some reason I could neither attack nor defend, and the enemy was equally passive. I ended up having to reset the game and start from my last save file. Annoying. So all in all, this game gives a mixed impression, but it's in line with what it's sold for. This is not a $60 game, so $20 feels reasonable. With that said, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I review new games every week. Have a nice day, see ya!